Welcome to the Everyday Dan podcast, where we embark on a bite-sized journey of curiosity and discovery into the myriad of fascinating topics that I am passionate about. I'm your host, Dan, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this adventure as we learn new things together. Well, hello, and welcome back to the Everyday Dan podcast, and just want to jump right in and say that we are starting out, and today is actually the final episode of Season 1. After today, we are going to take a couple-week hiatus while I'm preparing for Season 2. So in Season 2, we've already had a couple kind of interviews from other people, but we're going to do a little bit more. At this point now, I've spoken with 6 or 7 people for the potential next season. And a lot of those, we're going to have a mixture of interviews with people in my area, a director of a local ministry program, kind of that oversees a ton of churches. I have at least 1 or 2 YouTubers that I've kind of connected with as well. So we've got some really awesome guests. But today we're going to actually talk about, it's going to be kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge. And today we're going to talk about a book series review, and tied to that, kind of the importance of reading. And what kind of kicked this off is I love reading, first off. I have a reading goal this year. I'm going to try and read at least 50 books, and I'm getting there. I'm enjoying that, and I read a very wide hodgepodge, so to speak. I've read philosophy, fiction, nonfiction, theological, autobiographical. There's a lot of different ones I've read. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. I think reading is one of the best activities you can do over even video games or other things. I know some people that are more nerdy might disagree. It's okay. I was in your shoes at one point. It's okay if you still like to play your video games. I'm just, maybe I'm transitioning out of that phase of life. But not super long ago, a really good friend of mine recommended a book to me. And the book was called 1 Second After, and the author is William Forstchen. Might be misspelling his name. I am going to put a link to him in the show notes so you can look him up. And he was kind of vague about it. He's like, it's a good book. You should totally read it. So I pulled it up, I looked it up, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I was hooked. And so I read that one. I read the sequel. I read the next sequel. I read the next sequel. So I read the entire series. And then I'm in the process of reading another book by the same author. And they're scary books, to be honest. They're not horror books. They're not. They're basically books that are built off of scientific / journalistic collections, is probably a good way of putting them. And they really hit. And kind of, I'm going to go through the description of at least the first one. I don't want to go too far into all of them, but in the description, very basic for 1 Second After, is basically there is an electromagnetic pulse that basically sends the entire country, the entire United States, back to the Dark Ages. If you're not familiar with what an EMP is, it's like I said, an electromagnetic pulse, and it's something that will fry anything electronic, even cars, anything that has a computer or is electrical in some way is going to be toast. With that, no internet, nothing. You're done. Cell phones gone, everything. And it was basically kind of built off of the studies and potentially that this is something that could happen. An EMP is something that no lies. Probably there's multiple other countries in the world today, right now, that have this technology. And it wasn't utterly chilling. So basically what happens at the beginning of this book, this EMP is detonated. They don't realize it because all of a sudden it just goes, people are just they're like a family is having like a barbecue, and all of a sudden they're in the middle of a phone call, and then it just, boom, the phone cuts off, dies. They see that their power's off. They think it's just one of those things. They live in a small town. And they're like, it's just one of those power outages. It happens. It only then occurs in the coming days that it's across the board. And it's a scary thing. And it kind of covers the first book covers about a year of the happenings in the thing, all sorts of stuff that happens, and it is very harrowing. The author is a very good writer, like I said, I jumped into the next one. So the first book is 1 year after, or 1 second after. Then it's 1 year after the final day, and then he also wrote 5 years after. And then there's a fourth book that is written by this author. I think he's actually written a number of them, but the other one is called 48 Hours. That's what I'm reading. And so these are all kind of based off and mapping out kind of the aftermath of this. And I've read a lot of books, and a lot of theological books and everything have impacted my thought processes. It has been a long time since a fiction, I'm going to call this a fictional, post-apocalyptic fiction. It's been a while. I don't know if I've ever had one that has impacted the mindset as well as this one has. I mean, we're talking that when I'm on the road and I'm 30 minutes away, I'm like, okay, how long would it take me to get home if everything fried? And thinking through, or when I'm an hour and a half away, like how long is that going to take? At least a week, maybe more. Lots of just, you never think about those things. But I mean, to the point now, I'm not gonna lie, I have a get home bag in my trunk. I am ready to go because I want to be able to get home if I need to. And I kind of mentioned to my wife, I was like, well, if something happens, this is what we need to do, kind of thing. It's a crazy thought, but we got to think about it. It's and the thing is too, is if you look at it, it's becoming more and more, possible, because an EMP is actually a natural byproduct of a nuclear bomb. If a nuclear bomb detonates, an electromagnetic pulse happens with that. So if they detonate it over the U.S., boom. We have the capability in the United States, which is a scary thought. And so anyways, as I read through these books, and it's changing my thought process, it also, kind of changed how I think about reading. I read for, obviously, growth and everything, so I kind of started to kind of go into this, there was basically kind of 3 after effects from reading this. Thinking about being aware of my surroundings, how far I am, what it's going to take and everything. It's also really kind of showed me how reliant we are on electronics, technology kind of things. I mean, everything we do, maybe you're listening to this on electronic device, probably. Yes, you are, I guarantee. I highly doubt that I'm going to have a cassette made of this. We are incredibly reliant on it on every area of our lives. So it was a really scary thought to think about how much something like this would affect us. And, and the fact is too, that probably on the general sense, most of us as citizens would not realize this would come, which is a crazy thought. So those are the first things, see how aware we are, and then thinking about the importance of being prepared on every level. Like what do we have, stores, all kinds of stuff. It was, and I'm by no means a prepper in any way, I promise. But it is definitely some of those things that's like, wow, this is crazy. Like I can't believe that this is something that could happen, but it could. It really could. And so it was a very good thing to be thinking about, to be aware of. So, and then after that, I started to have the mindset shift, and my kind of thought was, I kind of have 3 tiers of reading. So we have, and in those 3 tiers, we have several things. We have like the spiritual / thought process affecting. We have like the practical knowledge, which is kind of like, here's how you start a fire. Here's how you hotwire a car, something like that. And then you have like what I put into kind of like the third silo, which is kind of the not necessary, but still helpful or enjoyable. And so I kind of basically, my 3-tiered reading list is basically like, first is practical. So I have books on carpentry, books on survival, things like that. Those are what I would classify as practical, like day-to-day survival kind of thing. Very helpful. And then I have a bunch of books on spiritual. Like I was at a conference this past Saturday, and I got a bunch of spiritual books. No, excuse me. And those are books that are going to affect me on a spiritual basis. And then in that third tier are books like fiction. So I put books like fiction, books on philosophy, things that and I enjoy philosophy. I think it's relevant. I think it's important. But in a day-to-day basis, the first 2, practical knowledge, spiritual knowledge, I think have more importance than the philosophical. And that's kind of been a more recent turn of events, maybe even in the past month or so. I find those things helpful, but the problem is too is you can go too far into them. So I kind of skewed away from them. I still enjoy reading them, but I'm not gonna. If I have a choice, I'm gonna pick probably one of the first two, kind of thing. And I think that's an important thing is you start to think about what is actually relevant to you on a day-to-day basis, and then you go from there. And that's where you're gonna go. And depending on, maybe you're not a major reader, so maybe you're kind of digging through on a gradual basis, little by little. You're like, oh, this or that kind of thing. It really is going to vary. It's going to change, but it's important to read. Now, am I going to recommend that you go read the 1 Second After series? I don't know if I would recommend it to everyone, especially if you have if you are a sensitive mind. You have a sensitive mind. It's a harrowing book in the terms of it's not. They don't mess around. In terms of the after effects of what life could be. And it can be scary depending on who's reading it. So I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. I'd probably say if you're a little bit older, like young adult, probably like closer to 18-ish from there, maybe thinking about that. But very important nonetheless. So, I'll put in there, and I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, obviously, so you can look it up. These are probably not going to get posted until later in the day because I had a busy weekend and didn't have time to actually record them. It is Monday. I'm recording this around noon, but I'm not going to have time to actually put everything together and post it till this evening. So you'll probably get it this evening. But the moral of the story is basically you should be a reader. Even in the sense that leaders are readers. Kind of thing. It's important to understand across the spectrum of reading. Don't just waste time on one or two different books. I read all kinds of books, and even books that I think I might not like, I read, and sometimes I change my mind and I do like them. Sometimes I don't change my mind and I'm like, this was a terrible book to begin with. So it does vary from book to book. And as you think about it too, it's you want to basically just enjoy it. Enjoy what you're reading, take part in it, dive into it, and form opinions. Here's the thing, people are going to differ from me on even the way I kind of tier my reading and everything. There will be people that disagree with me on it, and that's fine. I have friends that have different styles of reading and everything. I don't agree necessarily with what they read necessarily, but sometimes I have friends that I agree with, and I'm like, yeah, solid reading, good reading habits. So it is going to really vary from person to person and where you're going to go, what you're going to do, and things like that. So think about what the content is that you're partaking of. Now, also, too, I'm going to make the comment as we zoom back around. Again, this was kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge, but be careful of the content that you read. There are definitely some authors that I would probably urge against reading. I'm going to urge, there's authors in fiction I would say no to reading. There's authors in philosophy I'd say no to reading. There's probably some theological authors I'd probably, say, maybe this isn't the best. So be prudent and think about it. Now, for me as a Christian, my priority, what's the first and foremost thing I should be reading is the Bible. And so I make that a priority. But go ahead and read other things. But ultimately, any choice I make, my books that I read can influence that, but the ultimate choice and the ultimate influence of that should be the Bible. And that's where you need to end. You need to start in the Bible and end in the Bible. You might have some stuff in between, but that's how you kind of always have to go, no matter what you're reading. And if something is against that, if you're reading this and you're like, this is very clearly unbiblical, you potentially should not be reading that. And that's what I would maintain. You should be thinking about that. But that is it for today's episode. I'm glad you guys tuned in, and I will see you guys again in several weeks. And we're going to come in. I've got some potentials for, coming in with a good bang. The next couple weeks, I'm going to be hopefully recording a number of episodes and getting them all scheduled out and everything, so we don't have any lapses. And like I said, I don't know about you guys, but I am super excited about season 2, and I hope that you are going to be as well. But until then, let's go learn.